before you start talking, but let me go ahead and kick off the
Oh,
proceedings.
perfect. I'll take those 2 minutes.
You got it. Welcome to the smartest people in the room. We are so glad you are here with us, and just by showing up, you are already demonstrating your very own smarts. Today, we are pleased to deliver a program featuring two of the coolest cats we know, one from Nashville, the other from New York. Ironically, they're both in New York today. Both have a lot to say, and I promise you will leave today smarter and inspired by these two guys. Before we get started, please let me take care of some business. First, to the audience, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat window. The reason we do these webinars is twofold. First, we want to showcase really smart people and the amazing work they do day to day in the music industry. But the second reason is a bit more nuanced. Many of you know that I am a music industry headhunter. I place music executives in roles throughout the industry. So by definition and function, I help people connect with companies. In this series, my goal is to help you make more connections, and I invite you to take full advantage of that opportunity. Specifically, I invite you to engage with the speakers and the other attendees in the chat of the Zoom. Please introduce yourselves, share your LinkedIn profile, say hello to your friends, and make some new ones. And ask questions of our speakers. We will try to address as many of those as possible during the interview itself. Also, please make sure your chat is set to address speakers and attendees. I want to thank our sponsors, for without their support, we could not keep this free. I want to thank First Horizon Bank, Bufkin Baker, Four Roses Bourbon, the Tennessee Entertainment Commission, Lightning 100, Tennessee Brew Works, Moo TV, Jive Printing, Project Music, and Cushmaster's brand of CBD products. So let's get down to business. In today's host seat, we welcome Dr. Warren Zanes from New York City. Warren is a New York Times best-selling author and a Grammy-nominated documentary producer. For 10 years, he was executive director of Stephen Van Zant's Rock and Roll Forever Foundation. A former VP of Education and Programs at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and Museum, Warren has taught at several American universities, including Case Western Reserve, the University of Rochester, the School of Visual Arts, and currently NYU. His writing has appeared in the LA Times, Rolling Stone, the Oxford American, and many more. He's editor of collections on Jimmie Rodgers and Tom Petty, has written books including Dusty in Memphis, Revolutions in Sound, 50 Years of Warner Brothers Records, and Petty, the Biography, which Rolling Stone named one of the top 10 music books of 2015. He collaborated with Garth Brooks on Brooks' New York Times best-selling anthology book series, and has written liner notes for projects including George Harrison's Let It Roll and Elvis Presley, The Searcher. After conducting interviews for Martin Scorsese's George Harrison, Living in the Material World, Warren acted as consulting producer for the Oscar-winning 20 Feet from Stardom, writer on Tom Zimny's The Gift, The Journey of Johnny Cash, and was producer on the Grammy-nominated 8-part PBS series Soundbreaking, executive produced by Beatles producer George Martin. A former member of Warner Brothers recording artists, the Del Fuegos, he has released 4 solo recordings with Dual Tone, and is currently a member of Pulitzer Prize-winning poet Paul Muldoon's Rogue Oliphant, co-writing a number of songs with Muldoon. Welcome, Warren. So glad to have you with us.
Thank you so much.
And joining Warren as today's special guest is my good friend Jed Hilly. Jed is the executive director of the Americana Music Association, and under his leadership, the organization has grown in prominence, profitability, and every other imaginable way. Since 2007, Jed has overseen all aspects of the not-for-profit artist advocacy group and serves as the executive producer of its Americana Fest music festival and conference and the critically acclaimed Honors and Awards show. During his tenure, the growth of the Americana Music Association has spread to 3 continents, from Nashville to all 50 states, with satellite events in London, LA, New York, and Australia. Membership has increased over 400% from 700 to 3,000. Jed drafted proposals and successfully lobbied the Recording Academy to add the Best Americana Album in 2009, the Best Roots Music Song in 2013, and Performance in 2014 to its Grammy Awards. And in 2011, Merriam-Webster added the word Americana as a musical term to its prestigious collegiate dictionary. Previously, Jed spent 10 years of diverse experience with Sony Music Entertainment. As well, he oversaw the estate of Roy Orbison before accepting the role as executive director at the Americana Music Association. Please welcome these two rock stars to the smartest people in the room. Take it away, Warren.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you so much, Tom. And my apologies for a slightly froggy throat. I've been traveling with my son, but froggy or not, I'd push over anything in my way to do something with Jed Hilly. So Jed, thank you for asking me to be a part of this. And I just want to dive right in because time is limited given how much we can talk about here. But you've got a prehistory before you came into the world of music, and I'm wondering, rather than go through the entirety of that past, could you pluck something from it that you learned along the way that was a transferable knowledge, something that you learned in that prehistory that applied when you got into the music business?
Well, I think one thing I learned is that I learn the most when I'm not the smartest person in the room. And that's why I wanted to call you to be part of this. And that is true because, we go through different experiences. Before I was in the music business, I guess travel was the most dynamic experience that I had. I didn't go straight to college. I went to Europe. I traveled through the Middle East before I was 20 years old. And being completely free to experience whatever I encountered was the greatest attribute I think my parents gave me. And what I learned from that was just to be open to new ideas. And fast forward to being open to new ideas, to different cultures, to different ways of thinking. That's what we've all been going through this year. That is probably the greatest lesson in my life that I learned. How about you?
I got into music pretty early on. So I joined the Del Fuegos when I was 17. So there wasn't a whole lot of prehistory. I had to find my way out of that forest eventually. But I did go away to boarding school before joining, and I was a scholarship student, and really as a scholarship student you're supposed to show up and do well, and I was at the bottom of my class the whole way. 2 times this school asked me not to return, and I kept coming back. And so I'd say the big lesson that I learned there was, though I was at the bottom of my class, though they asked me not to return, I got so much out of that experience. So sometimes the tools by which we measure the success of an experience are multiple. So grades didn't work in this case. And I think this applies to music, where some of the most important records to me didn't do well if we measure by charts, if we measure by audience. Dusty in Memphis that I wrote, one of the 33 and third books, not a successful record. So important to me, so important to Jerry Wexler. And I say this to NYU students who are in songwriting, is like, be ready to view this from a couple different angles, because sometimes your most important work isn't going to show up in the places you hope it will.
Yeah. No, I can totally relate to that. And I think in terms of my life and career, I always had a passion for music and a passion for the arts. Being inquisitive, in my experience, looking, how I ended up at Americana after many, many years and a lot of trials and tribulations from the mailroom and climbing the proverbial ladder. It was that appreciation for getting up on stage. I had a very brief experience with not near the success that you had or so many others had, but I still get a lump in my heart when I see something new. I experience a different art form. Um, that to me is the most exciting thing. Kind of similar to showing up in in the souk in Damascus as a 19-year-old kid, not knowing where I was, not understanding the language per se, but the experience of not knowing what that language was or not knowing what that song was and hearing it for the first time is kind of the same thing. So
Yeah.
that's what I think that was to answer that question is, what was that experience or what were the experiences that I took from my pre-music business to today was that's the longest lasting one. I still live to go to a show, and I have to go to a lot of shows. I can't sometimes, like during Americana Fest, I have to be in 5 places at the same time. No exaggeration. Everybody who's been to the event understands what that means. And there is nothing greater than going to see a new artist that I'd never seen before and being forced to stay for the entire 45-minute set. That to me is thrilling.
So, since you've got a long, many-headed career, and we really are, if speaking generally, the generation that has watched a number of changes, whether it's the medium from vinyl to CD to consolidation of labels to a moment in this new digital world where you can actually do it all without a label. Amidst all that change, what remain the constants for you when you're trying to be the best person you can be in this business, because it is business? What are the lessons that transcend any of those changes?
From the business perspective, I think the about, I don't know how many years ago, 8 or 10 years ago, in my current role, I had been invited by Roseanne Cash to her father's childhood home. And I didn't know Roseanne very well at that point in my career. And being a single dad, it was like fall break, and I was like, I can't go. I got to take care of the kids. And she said, bring the kids, which I was kind of stunned, but I said, okay. So we got in the car and we drove out to, not Turkey Scratch, Arkansas, but Dyess, Arkansas. And we were closer to the moon than we were to civilization. This is 40 acres and a mule territory. And I arrived with my 3 children, and Roseanne was there with her husband, John, and son, Jake. And I really didn't know her very well. And I'm looking around and I'm like, well, who else is coming? And she's like, that's it. And before long, I realized she had never been to this house before. She had never visited the house before. She wasn't calling me as a friend because we hardly knew each other. She was calling me for what she thought the Americana Music Association represented, and in part, what she thought I needed to be doing. I think, she thought, well, Jed's going to get it because that's his mission. And that's what the Americana Music Association meant to her. And it was intense. It was like, I made the comment, like, this is the first time you've been here too. And we walked through the house holding hands in tears for the next 40 minutes while she brought back memories of stories her dad had told her. And what I came away with after that weekend was that my job was less to advocate and support new record labels that wanted to be in the business of Americana, or music professionals like me, or marketing professionals, or advertising, or publicists, or agents. And I mean no disrespect to all of them. My job was to support the passion of the artists, to advocate the authentic voice of the artists. And when I came back from that trip, I went back to the Americana board of directors and I said, we've got to change our mission statement, because our mission statement was a 6-paragraph diatribe about how we were in the business to support the business, for the business. Those who were interested in the business, was all about the business. And we sat around for 3 days. We got a facilitator and we did one of those Post-it note days, where, what's the first word that comes to your mind when you think of Americana? And we all different types of categories, and literally like 48 hours nonstop with the whole group. And by the time we were done, we boiled it down to 14 words. The mission of the American Music Association is to advocate for the authentic voice of American roots music. And since then, that's when membership took off. It was just a shift. It wasn't like we might have put out a press release following a board meeting, say, the board met for 3 days and came up with a new mission statement. But it wasn't like we were marketing this new mission statement. It was just something that we felt we needed to do. And it was great. It was very succinct. It could roll off your tongue. And since then, attendance has gone up, membership has gone up, sponsorships have gone up. We've grown from a staff of 2 to a staff of 6. We bring in 120 volunteers to help us to create Americana Fest. We were in 5 venues, then we were in 7 venues, then we were in 15 venues, 20 venues. In 2019, we were in 70 venues in 8 city council districts in Nashville. And I attribute all of that to foundationally being respectful and honoring, and our first job is to support the artists, because they're our common bond. It's not about supporting the business. Without the artist, there is no business. So that's my foundation.
So in part of it is I think a few people view it from afar and think that you're handling this category, Americana, and there are people who don't like categories. Yeah. Myself, I view them as absolutely necessary, but at the same time, they can be confining. When we were talking yesterday, I've already mentioned Jerry Wexler. And Jerry, before he was at Atlantic, was at Billboard, and he was the guy who renamed the race charts Rhythm and Blues. And obviously that was a shift in language that had tremendous cultural, political repercussions. But he kept thinking about the category, and late in life said, I named it the wrong thing. It should have been rhythm and gospel. That was the truth of it. There was more gospel in that music than anything else. But what I loved about that is that he was restless in handling this category, because he understood that any language put to a genre is ultimately going to be insufficient. Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, how do you deal with that? Because you got to have one, but inevitably the people are going to crawl out of the woodwork and say, there shouldn't be a category.
Yeah, no, or it's not a category, or it's not a genre, or it's, it's funny. Before I took the job, I went to see my dad, like some of us may do. And, I had a good gig with Mrs. Orbison. She was a magnificent human being. And I learned a tremendous amount with her. And I also knew she wasn't going to give me a piece of Roy's Publishing. So I thought, well, maybe I'll take this new job and make a little bit more money. I wasn't correct about the latter. Barbara took care of me, God bless her. So I sit down with my father and he says, what is Americana? And I'm pulling out these notes that the board of directors gave me. And he is the one who literally said, well, is it in the dictionary? And we looked in the dictionary, and that which is intrinsically American was in the dictionary. But as a musical term, rock and roll was in there, jazz was in there, country was in there. Americana was not considered to be a term. And he looked at the list of artists, and he said, would any of these people stand up for you and wave the flag of Americana? It was a pretty lofty list, and I couldn't answer that either. And then he said, "Well, is Levon Helm even alive?" It was like, actually, I'm not sure. Levon was one of 20 or 30 artists that was on this list I had been given by the search committee for the association. So naturally, Dad walked away from the conversation. Dad's like, I wouldn't take a job. Turned around and walked away. So yeah, even for my dad's looking for a context of what is this son's talking about doing. So the first week on the job is when I had a volunteer assistant who came over with me from Mrs. Orbison, and first thing I asked her to do, I said, write Merriam-Webster and let's figure out how to get a word in the dictionary. And within a week, we got an email back from Merriam-Webster saying, please don't write to us. Please don't start a petition. This is our job since 1848. We've been determining, what the usage of language and the vernacular of words and whether they are words that exist in our language. But thanks for writing us. Please don't do it again and don't start a petition. So I clicked my Outlook catalog to write them every 3 months. So every 3 months, I would write, we got a letter back from Anna Bello. I don't know if you're out there, Anna Bello. She's formerly a editor at Merriam-Webster Dictionary. She told me that every Monday they meet in Springfield, Massachusetts in a conference room, and they throw out new words every Monday. That's what they do. And one of the tasks they do at Merriam-Webster. And there's a handful of people who are trying to decide if the words meet a certain criteria or threshold in the vernacular, in magazines and periodicals and blogs, I imagine. So, that was important to my dad, and I realized that was important as well. And when I started, the board of directors, we didn't have a definition of what was Americana on our website. And I mentioned that to the board of directors after in the very first board meeting, and they gave me the classic line, well, it's like pornography. You know it when you see it. You know it when you hear it. And there's truth in that. I like to say today, if you can taste the dirt through your ears, that's Americana. So there's definitely something that differentiates Americana from other genres or categories. But as an appreciator of art, I don't want to say that, Emmylou Harris is an Americana artist, or that Levon was an Americana artist, or that when Bob went electric at Newport was the dawn of Americana. It very well may have been, but I don't like to say that because I don't know what Jason Isbell's going to do in his next album, or Emmy, or and I also know, having a very brief experience playing in a rock and roll band, if you will, I don't think artists like to be categorized. So one of the beauties of Americana is that I get to talk out of both sides of my mouth. I get to lobby for the Grammys and say, not only is this a category, this is a genre. This is, but today it's more about a community.
I think one of the most, sorry to interrupt, one of the most amazing things I feel like you've pulled off is that notion of you can taste the dirt in it.
Yeah.
Has gotten more expansive over the years. So when I hear that, I'm not thinking just about the Dias Colony. I'm thinking about RZA and the Wu-Tang Clan on Staten Island, because Enter the Wu-Tang, I can taste the dirt on that. I mean, he was running an extension cord out of his apartment down to his aunt's because he didn't have power. And it's like, I see a through line. I'm not saying that's Americana, but I think you've successfully pushed the idea out so that more doors come into the category every year. And
Yeah.
that's interesting to
Yeah.
me.
No, I totally agree. I mean, in the founders of the Americana Music Association came together in the spring of 1999. And it was a reaction. It was a political reaction in many ways. They were wanting to shine a light on those artists who were no longer being supported by the Nashville country music scene. It was Steve Earle, it was Dwight Yoakam, it was Johnny Cash, it was Roseanne. They started they started because the national music industry wasn't supporting these artists that they loved. So by the time 2000 came, and they all came together, the association was formed. It was formed out of this rebellion, but it was open-ended enough that by the time I came in, to me, it was growing more of a community. Dana Strong, who has worked with me, has worked with the association from, was at the first meeting and is our director of education for the conference. Dana had come to me and said, we need to do something for Muscle Shoals. Well, the music that came out of Muscle Shoals wasn't, pedal steel guitar laden, alternative country music. I mean, it was different. By creating the Americana Fest, which includes a festival, a business conference, and an award show, we hope to pay tribute to South by Southwest with imitation as a form of flattery. That's an incredible event. We try to learn lessons from that event. We're not nearly as corporate. We're more about the artist, but it's God willing, they'll come back next year. It's an incredible event. And we took the basic formula from it. To me, that formula is, as it relates to Americana, is we have an award show. We have a member voted of the year categories, 6 of them. And it is through membership who nominate, and through a process, we get to 5 nominees in each of the category: album, song, artist, emerging artist, duo, group, and instrumentalist. That to me is the process by which that's what we call Americana today. And if you look at Americana today, and if you go look at our awards and who's been nominated over the years, it's pretty interesting. This year we have Amethyst Kia, we have Allison Russell, we have Margot Price, we have Jason Isbell, we have Brandi Carlile, we have the Black Pumas. That's a very different landscape than 2002, the year that Johnny Cash graced us with his presence at the very first Americana Honors and Awards. Was Johnny Cash an Americana artist? I can tell you Johnny Cash is inspiration for a lot of people. So the other part of our award show is the Lifetime Achievement Awards. And to me, that's about inspiration. We've honored Flaco Jimenez. We've honored Buddy Guy. We've honored Stephen Stills. We've honored Emmylou Harris and Levon. Some of those Buddy Guy is not considered an Americana artist, but he's inspired people, Americana artists, people in the community. He's inspired all of us. And then the third category is our music, is our festival. And that's where we push the envelope. That to me, our music festival is the conversation of what is Americana. We can argue all day long what I think is Americana, what you think is Americana. It may be Wu-Tang Clan with you, and I'm not going to argue with you on that. I might suggest that we may not be there yet, but when the Wu-Tang Clan can write a song like John Prine's Paradise, then we can maybe get into a more serious conversation there.
I definitely was making a point. So
I know,
um,
and it's valid.
I want to take a slight left turn. You and I met when you were still working with Barbara and the Roy Orbison estate, and there's a difference. And I really saw it working with Tom Petty, uh, where he had to take that shift from a kind of life making an album, touring the album and promoting it, writing the next one, recording it. It was the album cycle. And then suddenly you could see Petty and Tony Dimitriadis becoming like watching Dylan make No Direction Home. It's like, oh, we gotta change our thinking. And it's the difference between, an album focused career and the legacy artist experience. And
Yeah.
I think you can be a young artist and learn from what the legacy artists do, because they have to think in a more expansive way. It's not about the next release. It's about what else can I be doing to be an artist in the world and to tell my stories. What would you say that you learned about legacy work from working with Roy Orbison that young artists that you meet at the Americana conference might learn from?
Well, I think in some ways it goes back to art. If you go to Barcelona and you go to the Picasso Museum, you can see that Picasso didn't just start as a Cubist artist. He studied the history from drawing a straight line to reproducing classics with his own pen and brush. You know, look at Dylan. Really studied the arts and took that forward into his song. Robert Plant, studied the blues, took that with him through the Band of Joy, through Led Zeppelin, back to the Band of Joy. And, as you had a wonderful experience when you were at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and it was at a show that you produced that Robert and Allison first performed together. In the Pines, was it?
Yeah, it was a Let Belly tribute.
Yeah,
with
yeah.
Harry Belafonte and Odetta, Clarence Gatemouth Brown's last show, and David Hidalgo, Los Lobos, and then Robert Plant. But Robert, it's very striking with Robert that he's got a very, for lack of a better word, historical approach to music.
Yeah.
Which I think was easier in his time. We were talking about this yesterday. It's like I look at my NYU students and they're facing a wall of content, and it's really difficult to kind of find the shape of history when you're coming at it through Spotify and you don't see reference to years and songwriters and sidemen. It's just there's not a lot of information. So how do you I was going to say promote, but how do you support this idea like you describe of know your history, and then you'll know your possibilities?
My dad once told me when I was working at Sony in the 90s that he said, find your guru in business and, learn from them. And I had a couple, one was a great friend named Dan Beck, who was Michael Jackson's product manager and Sade's product manager and Gloria Estefan's product manager. Dan was among the very best. I'm sure some people out there on the chat line know Dan, and I tried to do whatever I needed to do to be involved with Dan, because from my view, he was really smart. And so I just tried to wedge my way into Dan's world. But by way of saying, what can I do to help? Or and that's how I learned. And, I mentioned John Prine a couple of minutes ago. And, there are, artists like Sturgill Simpson, Chris Stapleton, Brandy Carlisle, Casey Musgraves, Jason Isbell. These are smart artists uh, uh, who sought to be in the presence of John Prine. There you go, Dan Beck. If you're out there, I'm kind of comparing you to John Prine in my own experience. But and that has rubbed off on each of those artists I just named, and there are so many others, and that the list goes on, and I don't mean to keep the list short because he was such a powerful and inspirational human being. But I think if I were to say something to a new artist, I mean, I say a few things. One might be is find your guru, much like my dad told me, and learn from that person. Study that what was right and what was wrong, what worked and what didn't. What didn't work is as important as what did. And then the other thing is to be humble. I mean, that was, when I started in the music business, I was 30, and I'd worked in a restaurant and played in a band, and I went in, and there was a great man named Ron Piccolo at Sony Music Entertainment, and Ron kind of talked like this, and he was like an Italian guy in Rego Park, and just a beautiful man. And he told me that I was 8 years older than everybody else that he hired for the one position he had open. And how would I deal with that fact that I was so much older than what would be my peer group? And my answer was to be humble. And I think that applies in music, in business. It paid well for me. I was a little bit older than my peers, but I got a promotion in 3 weeks, and then I got my second promotion in 2 months, and then I got my third promotion in 6 months, and I was working at Black Rock on 52nd Street in New York City.
I want to add to your, find your guru, learn from your guru. I would add, and don't think your guru is going to look like you think your guru should.
Yeah.
And my example of this would be, toward the end of the time when I was running Little Stevens Foundation, someone called me and asked if I would, work on a book project, and they wouldn't tell me who it was for until I signed a non-disclosure, and it was Garth Brooks, and this was out of my wheelhouse, but I'll tell you very quickly. It was the first day I worked with him, and at the end he carried my bag and walked me out to my shitty little rent-a-car, and gave me a hug and said, "Thank you so much for helping with this." And that style, that kind of humility and that human kindness. And in addition, the first thing he wanted to know about me was what were my kids' names and what were they interested in. And
Wow.
It's very different from rock and roll.
Yeah.
Like Tom Petty was, got to know each other pretty well, and he was kind, like he sent notes to my kids and stuff. But Garth, like, day one, let me know your kids. And I went, this is somebody I'm going to learn something from.
Yeah.
Like, I'm believing in the kindness of this person, but he wasn't what I thought my next mentor would look like. And then over the course of a couple of years, I feel like I've learned more about songs from him than I have from anyone I've ever met.
Yeah.
And it was unexpected. And it was another of those transferable knowledge moments where when I learned about songs from him, it wasn't just about country, because stories are handled differently in different genres, but story is crucial and emotion is crucial. And
Yeah.
he really drove those points home for me. And a big part of the joy was that it was a mentor-like figure who didn't look at all like, so I say, stay loose and be ready to receive the message from an unexpected direction. And
Yeah.
it makes work so much more joyful. And now I want to take another shift because I know you're a dad. And, when we're talking about teachers, uh, our children are pretty remarkable and they deliver lessons in some of the messiest ways possible. Sometimes clean, often messy. What have your kids taught you about music that matters to you?
Well, it is interesting because they are, each one of them, I have two girls and a boy. They're in their early 20s, 22, 22, and 24. They know their stuff. Um, they they are not so Americana inclined. Um, they're they listen to a wide spectrum of music, which I really, respect. Um, what's been beautiful to see is their appreciation now going backwards. Like they know everything across pop culture. And, like my son Charlie got into like the origins of sampling and the origins of song. And, both my daughters, sort of followed suit in their own ways, loving, and through today's music, learned about Marvin Gaye, learned about Al Green, learned about Irma Thomas. I mean, that was one thing. We had Irma Thomas at our award show a couple of years ago. And, my 21-year-old daughter at the time was like, Irma Thomas? Dad, you got Irma Thomas? Like, completely lost it. And I never, in her 21 years on the planet, would have thought that was going to be the trick that got her, cued into my world, which has been nice. But I got to take a turn back on you. We met when you were at the Rock Hall. What was the transition from being a teenage rock star with the Del Fuegos? I went to Hampshire College in Amherst, Massachusetts, so I was very aware of that rock band in Boston. You guys might even have played my college once, or certainly played Amherst at least once or twice. And so how, you took a giant shift to the education side of music by going to the Rock Hall, by going and getting your PhD, Dr. Zanes. Like, what possessed you to like leave the joys and fruits of rock and roll and go into education?
Yeah, well, not good sense, not reason. All leads back to matters of the heart and girls, like all the shifts. So I was in New Orleans after quitting the Del Fuegos, and I was dating a young woman who I wanted to continue dating, and it was seeming like maybe she didn't want to. And she said, the problem with you, Warren, is you got all your eggs in one basket. And I said, well, how do you get a second basket going? I didn't know. It was all music for me. I didn't know anything else mattered. And she said, you go to school. And so I pulled out a map and I found the closest university because my car had been crushed by a tree and I would have to walk, and it was Loyola University.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
And yeah, so I wanted to stay in this relationship. So I took a history of philosophy. It would make me smarter, I thought. And then a history of women's literature. I thought maybe she would like me more. And next thing I knew, I had a PhD And then I wrote a book that Tom Petty read, and that was kind of it. Like what I try to say this to my students, like, stay alert, stay alive. But if you got any questions about careers from me, I've never gotten a job I applied for. So I may not be the guy to talk to, but
Yeah.
I feel like the message is like, I did apply for jobs, but a lot of good fortune came my way. And it often was the kind of fortune that pulled me back into music in some way. So music, I went from playing music to studying it in a classroom to getting another record deal with the Dust Brothers to writing a book, and Tom Petty and Diana Ross read it, and it didn't sell great. Another example of this, you can't measure it by the marketplace. It's like, who read it? Jerry Wexler read it, Diana Ross, and things happened. And suddenly I had this life in music that was about much more than playing music. And I didn't craft that. I think I just stayed alert enough. So, there's a lot of good fortune in there, but it's also, it's fed me. And, all roads lead back to the song for me. And I'm sure the same for you.
Yeah. So I remember before the pandemic, I remember you sharing with me the cultivation of the relationship with Garth. You had worked on the Bogdanovich film, right?
With
the
Petty, you mean?
Yeah, you had worked on that. You'd worked on the Harrison project with Marty, I think, doing a lot of the interviews, and then COVID hits. Like, what I don't think we haven't Zoomed. I mean, Tom here has created a genius platform for Zoom that I think is so exciting, because for some who have Zoom fatigue, Tom's is like twice a week he's presenting these really cool, Zoominars or whatever, great conversation, really interesting people. Kudos to you, Tom Truitt, because you figured out a great application of this when a lot of people are struggling to sit in front of the computer now 18 months into this pandemic. But how did it hit you?
Well, it started as being grateful for Zoom. I have to be honest. I'm a long-term clean and sober guy, and I watched the culture of Alcoholics Anonymous go into this Zoom thing really quickly. There's a lot to learn from the culture of recovery. Like, it's got this kind of fleet-footed thing when people really need it. And I went, okay, I get Zoom, because I always looked at Zoom as a parasite. Like, please don't put me on a Zoom meeting. Yeah. Then pandemic hits, and I viewed it differently because it was nourishing me. Then I kind of look at my kids and watch them get into Zoom, and it was good, and then it wasn't.
Yeah.
Like, they were going to school on Zoom and something big was missing.
Yeah.
And so I had to think as a parent, like, how do I try to fill in these gaps? I'm sure I did it imperfectly. And when it came to work, obviously, we all know there are upsides. The remote, being home more, having dinner with your people more, these are good things, but we are two-dimensional. I was teaching my NYU students on Zoom. So one part of the story is really powerful. We are able to adapt. We're pretty good at that. The other is like, man, we need to be closer to each other's bodies. That one isn't lost on me. And music on a screen in 2 dimensions, it'll never be music in a club where you're like, it's apples and oranges.
Yeah, we had to make a huge decision. Zoom was incredible for us. The internet was incredible for us. We transitioned a year ago to produce something called Thriving Roots, which was a virtual music conference. what was extraordinary about that, it started on a couple as a gradual progression to the internet, because Jackson Brown joined our foundation board, and he wanted to do, he was interested in doing oral history, and the first artist he wanted to talk to was Mavis. Boom, first panel for the Americana Thriving Roots Conference was Jackson Brown and Mavis. And then it occurred to me, oh, I'm going to call Roseanne, see what she wants to do. And Roseanne, within 24 hours, responds back. We have a Zoom call with my whole staff. And she's like, I'm going to call Bonnie Raitt and Ry Cooder and Angela Davis. And I want to do a panel on the history of protest songs. Okay, that's two. You know, I called Emmy and Ken Burns and Dayton Duncan and said, hey, would you guys have a conversation? And they said yes. That was the only one I think I kind of curated. You know, the Lumineers come back. We're gonna meet with M. Knight, Shyamalan, and the Avets come back, and we're gonna have a conversation with Judd Apatow. You know,
yeah, but I mean, I just as an outsider, I got to acknowledge that's incredibly high quality content. So that's not about Zoom to me. That's about just really good programming. You know, great pairings. I'll watch that shit in any form.
Yeah, we've got 75 hours of it. It's incredible.
Yeah, but I did run out of steam with living room concerts.
Yeah,
it was hard to stay interested, but I'm glad it did allow some artists to make a living. They found ways to monetize it. You know, grateful for that, but a lot of the content was not close to the level you're describing.
Well, and we wouldn't, and we always have some of that. We've had great interviews at Americana Fest in the past. You know, we're going to have great interviews at Americana Fest this year. We're going to get great journalists like Ann Powers to, talk to people like Valerie June, and Jackson is actually coming to give an in-person keynote for us. Joe Henry is gonna be part of it with Eva O'Donovan and so many more that we're just but we're coming back. We had to make a decision by April. It's one thing to produce an in-person event. I mean, we started 3 months late. We normally start producing Americana Fest in January. We didn't start till mid-March. And then we had to decide, well, are we going to do virtual, or what are we going to do? And we're pulling out all the plugs, and we're going for in person, and we're working with the city, and it's scary. We want to be safe. We're trying to establish all the protocols, but it's pretty intense what's going on in the world of Americana as we push forward for, we have 2 months from today is when the Americana Honors and Awards will take place at the Ryman. And
quick question for you, Tom. How much time have I got to hit Jed with questions?
Carry on. We can be here as long as you want.
Okay.
That's trouble.
I was thinking that it was an hour. That's roughly your time zone, right?
Sounds good.
Okay. I want
we'll lose
to
our chat room with much more than that.
Yeah. No, I'm going to go with the hour format, and I wanted to ask you a kind of more general, slightly more abstract question, but I feel sometimes like music culture doesn't do enough to learn from the other arts. I think there are some characters like Tom Waits, for instance, who's really enriched his musical life by looking beyond the territory associated with music to try some new stuff. in what ways do you think we could do more of that, whether as producers or as artists? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I'll take a stab at it. I mean, what's fascinating in the community, I won't call it a genre or a category, but in the community that I get to participate in today, and I'm humbled to participate in today, they're really smart people. Mary Gauthier just, wrote a book. Brandy Carlisle just wrote a book. Roseanne Cash written compelling book. Rodney Crowell's written compelling. I mean, these are artists, showing up in actually one incredible, story. I don't know if any of you out there have ever been in Jeff Rosen's office, but sitting in Jeff Rosen's office, behind Jeff at his desk in his office is the original painting that Bob Dylan made that is the cover of Planet Waves. A lot of the artists in the community I get to work in value the arts in general, and I think that's as a producer, I take pride in the fact that in many, the structure of our award show does pay some reverence to the legends. We kind of go through the emerging artists and the hot new artists, and towards the end of our award show, we pay tribute to those legendary artists that we have selected each year with Lifetime Achievement Awards. I think that's an aesthetic of the community that I represent, that I'm pleased to absorb. I think I had some of it before I got there, but it really became ingrained in the way I do things as I grew into producing events as well.
I'm terrible with running a chat room. I got to say that first. Like I'm all focused on Jed, so I apologize if questions have emerged that I haven't handled. But I want to throw one more at you because I remember when Seagram's bought a bunch of the labels, and there was this moment where, oh no, the music business as we know it is dying, and it felt anxious, and obviously it wasn't dying, it was transforming, and the people who remained standing seemed to be the ones who had the greatest capacity to bend and kind of take on a kind of plasticity. But I'd also call it a spiritual relationship to a business. Just like in Buddhism, they'll talk about not having attachments. Like our pain comes from these worldly attachments. And on some level, the best way to be in the music business is to not be attached to any particular moment, because the only given now is that moment ain't gonna last. So what's your spirituality in the business that you would share with the group?
Well, I think you're spot on. I remember back in those times, I remember when, I think Warner might have been the last of the majors that became that was bought by a conglomerate. I remember at strange times, it may sound, in the 90s, that it was like the CBS Records became Sony Music, and it was the last place you could go in the music business where you could actually have a career, because by 1999, like, you were going to get fired at some point in your tenure at any company that you joined, any major label company. I've been inspired by, again, I've been very lucky. We all had to deal with a lot of crazy stuff in the music business, particularly those of us who made it through the 90s. there were some artists that we liked and some artists that we didn't like, and there was a different culture. And I thought it was interesting. You made me think of this as you mentioned the kindness of Garth Brooks. There were some very kind people that I got to meet along the way when I was at Sony. I thought Bruce Springsteen was very kind when I had the opportunity to meet him. I fell in love with Gloria Estefan and her mom. I mean, these people were really nice and really kind, but the kindest people I've met have been since I in the music business, have been since I started working at the Americana Music Association. I live for the thank you notes that I got, and it's a humbling thing to get a handwritten letter from an artist that you respect and you admire, and it's a deeply moving thing when they're thanking you for what you do that occupies your brain and that that pays my rent. I don't know if that answers the question, but it's
it's funny. I was so raised on staring at pictures of the Rolling Stones, going, that's the summit. Like you do a ton of blow and you cruise out of town yelling "fuck you," that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the day, it's like the kindness that matters. It's, I both go, wow, I'm really getting older here.
Yeah.
But it is like the Stones they cannot be my rule. I got to look elsewhere for my rule. I love them to death.
Yeah.
But what makes people survive in so much flux in the business, I think really does come down to, creative spirit and kindness.
I might have a closing remark on my side, which is when Bonnie Raitt came to do a show for the Americana Music Association at Lincoln Center, I don't know, 5-6 years ago. And I told Bonnie as we were stage left that I was a 17-year-old kid who went to see Bonnie Raitt and Asleep at the Wheel in Vermont at what was then Glen Ellen ski area. I remember it well. Asleep at the Wheel's bus, of course, broke down en route to this small town in Vermont. And so Bonnie, who was headlining, went on first because she is gracious. And then Ray and the band rolled in 45 minutes later, and then Bonnie just stayed on the stage and she played with Asleep at the Wheel when they came on the stage as well. It was like one incredible night, and I shared that with her, and I said, if you had told 17-year-old Jed that he would be standing on the outdoor stage in Donrush Park at Lincoln Center, getting about ready to introduce Bonnie Raitt 35 some odd years later, 17-year-old Jed would have said from your lips to God's ears. And Bonnie Raitt responded by saying, well, if 17-year-old Jed had told Bonnie Raitt back then that you would be introducing me at Lincoln Center 35 years later, I would have said from your lips to God's ears. And it was just that humility that she gave me in that moment to say that she valued who she was, where she was at, but she didn't take it for granted.
Yeah. Well, I can't think of a better way to close the session. That's a great story. I love you, Jed Hilly.
I love you too, man.
Thank you, everybody, for
thank you, Tom Truitt,
being a part of this. And Tom, thank you for being at the helm.
Listen, all the thanks go to you two guys. This has been incredible, very inspiring, very enlightening, very informative. Exactly what we try to deliver every time on the Smartest People in the Room. Warren, you are as advertised. Jed said you'd be the smartest one, and you clearly are, and we thank you for it. Keep writing books.
I got a couple ex-wives who beg to differ, but that's for another episode.
Well, listen, to the audience, thank you for your continued attention here. We continue to deliver on our promise to bring folks like Jed and Warren to you, and we will be right back here next Tuesday with
Come to Americana Fest. sorry to plug our event. Americana Fest in Nashville, September 22nd to 25th.
Has
Get
anyone heard that
vaccinated.
today at all? Listen, Jed, we're all going to be there and we can't wait. It's my favorite week of music in this town. And as you know, living here, we are spoiled rotten with live music opportunities. None better than what you deliver every year. So keep doing it.
Thank you.
Finally, to the audience, get your fucking shots now, okay? So we can continue having live music. And with that, I shall say good day. Thank you, folks.
Bye-bye.